So I wanted to be real with you all today and share something that I've grown increasingly concerned about over the past few years. I've worked with a number of students from wealthy backgrounds who have been applying for LSAT accommodations. Basically, they're getting extra time on the exam, either 50% extra time or double time. And as a result, some of these students might be getting somewhat of an unfair advantage. LSAC has gotten increasingly liberal over the past few years about granting testing accommodations like extra time, in part because they've been sued a number of times for being too strict about granting those accommodations. So LSAC has gone from being a bit overly strict, requiring lots of documentation, having early deadlines to submit all of that. And they've now gone to the other extreme where they're granting accommodations left and right and potentially including a lot of people who might not deserve or need those accommodations. Obviously, it's kind of tricky to determine whether someone should get accommodations or not, and the decision is difficult to make sometimes. But LSAC is giving accommodations in a number of cases where it might not really be warranted. One thing they've started doing is they're giving accommodations automatically to anyone who got them in the past. So maybe you got them for the SAT or the ACT several years ago, and you're automatically getting them now without any evaluation as to whether you might really need them in the present moment. If you did not get extra time or other accommodations before, then you need to seek the documentation from a qualified professional. But there are many professionals out there who will evaluate you and may give you that positive recommendation just in exchange for a couple $1,000s. So this tends to disproportionately benefit the wealthy. And in fact, there are certain wealthy towns all over the US where something like 20% of the kids have been diagnosed with some kind of learning disability, maybe because their parents can afford these qualified fancy professionals. Then the kids get extra time on every exam from the SAT and ACT to grad level, etc. And this is a problem because, of course, you got to have the money, you got to pay to play. And not all of these kids might need those accommodations, and then they're competing against kids who don't come from the wealthy background and don't get those same accommodations. Another thing that's happened with LSAC is that scores from students who received accommodations are not noted on your record. So law schools will never know whether you got accommodations or not. And as a result, you get a 170 with the extra time when maybe you would have gotten a 160 or even worse beforehand. So the scores are not necessarily comparable. It's hard to know if the accommodations are simply leveling the playing field or giving you a boost. But bottom line, law schools will never know. And so if you think you can get accommodations and you think you might need them, then of course it's in your interest to go ahead and do it, and you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you did not get those accommodations. So accommodations take a few different forms. I'm speaking strictly about the more neuro side of things, more like extra time rather than physical disabilities that might hinder one's ability to read, like if someone is blind or if someone has an issue with their hand or they need someone to take notes for them or read out loud to them. Any one of those things. I'm talking instead about simply things like ADHD, for example. So someone might get extra time, 50% extra becomes 52.5 minutes. I think LSAC rounds it up to 53 minutes. And obviously having that extra 17, 18 minutes makes a huge difference when you're doing any one of those 35-minute time sections to instead get 52.5 or 53 minutes. So I think that one's a no-brainer. Getting double time, 70 minutes, you'd be sitting there for a really long time. The LSAT as a whole, just the 5 35-minute LSAT content sections, that brings you to about 3 hours and 10 minutes, including the break. With 50% extra time, that becomes over 4.5 hours, which is still probably manageable. But with double time, we're looking at a really long time, and LSAC will typically break it across 2 days. They'll spread it across 2 days if you get double time. 4.5 hours, it's still pretty long. You might want to do it, you might not. If you're considering that, I would suggest doing a couple of timed practice exams to see how your endurance is and whether you think you'll be able to get your endurance up to that level. Honestly, for me, my brain is fried just after doing the normal 5 sections with 35 minutes. Being there over 3 hours, I'm already fried, I'm done. 4.5 hours, that might be doable for someone like me just because I have all this exposure to the exam and all the experience with it. But for you, it might be another matter. So try it out, see what works for you. Bottom line is that if you think accommodations might apply to your situation, if you have the money and if you have the need, then definitely seek them out. I think the 53 minutes, the 50% extra time is a no-brainer for you if you can do the 4.5 hour sitting. Otherwise, I would say probably best to steer clear of it. The double time across 2 days, think about whether you want that, but there's no question that getting extra time can help your score and your admission chances, especially since LSAC is not putting any note on the record of accommodated test takers. Their scores are not flagged in any way. So this could be an incredible opportunity, even if it is somewhat of an unlevel playing field. Of course, you just want to maximize your own chances. I completely understand that. So seek them out, see what works for you. I wish that LSAC hadn't swung the pendulum so far in this direction. I would rather they have chosen a more moderate middle ground in terms of who gets accommodations, but it is what it is. And I think given the fact they've been sued so many times and given that they've had to pay out enormous fines or legal fees to the other parties involved, and as well as to many test takers who were denied accommodations in the past, I think this is probably here to stay. So all the best to you whenever you're taking the LSAT, whether you are taking it with accommodations or not. If you need anything at all, any questions, any future video requests, please reach out and let me know or leave a comment. I've been getting a lot of questions about accommodations, so I'll be doing more videos about this in the near future. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I wish you all the best.